listener production.
Hey, Sacha, Barbour, Gatt with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Over the past 48 hours, Donald Trump has been dominating global headlines, announcing the members of his hand-picked team for the next 4 years. Some of Trump's staunchest and most loyal defenders are being rewarded with positions in his administration. And each pick offers us a better insight into how he wants to shape America over his presidency. So, who are the biggest names in Trump's administration so far? And with just over 2 months until he takes the White House, and what do these appointments tell us about how another 4 years under Donald J. Trump might look? My co-host Bension Siebert has been digging through each announcement as they've come through. Bension, thank you for joining us today. Look, we have to start with yesterday's big but unsurprising announcement about Elon Musk.
Big and very unsurprising. He's, as we know, the world's richest man. He's the owner of X, formerly Twitter, Tesla and SpaceX. He's a hero of the Manoverse internet right-wing free speech warrior. He is, I guess, also a leading voice politically, arguing against the Democrats, saying that they're bringing in illegal immigrants in order to boost their voter numbers. He, along with Vivek Ramaswamy, have been named to run a new department called the Department of Government Efficiency, codenamed DOGE. It's effectively, not to put too fine a point on it, the wet dream of small government conservatives. The idea behind this is to slash and burn what they describe as massive waste, inefficiency, overregulation in the American government.
Your money is being wasted, and the Department of Government Efficiency is going to fix that. We're going to get the government off your back and out of your pocketbook.
Musk uses examples whenever he tweets about this, about the US government funding studies about whether fish become more sexually promiscuous when they're given cocaine. And basically his argument is that there's huge amounts of waste and over expenditure in the government, and he's the guy to cut that waste. He has argued that the Department of Education, for example, should be closed altogether. He has tweeted that there are about 450 federal government agencies. He says 99 would be enough, which, doing just a little bit of maths, would cut most of the federal government from the US. He's job sharing effectively with Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, you might remember this guy as one of the people who competed against Donald Trump to try and get the Republican nomination.
And our message to Gen Z is this: you're going to be the generation that actually saves this country. You want to be a rebel? You want to be a hippie? You want to stick it to the man? Show up on your college campus and try calling yourself a conservative. Say you want to get married, have kids, teach them to believe in God and pledge allegiance to their country. Because you know what? Fear has been infectious in this country, but courage can be contagious too. That too is what it means to be an American.
And he has been even more forthright in his argument that there's a lot that they can cut out of the government, not just the education department. He says that they should get rid of the FBI and the Internal Revenue Service. And he says that the federal workforce could be cut by 75% in a mass layoff. Now, it is unclear how much power these men will actually wield from a institutional perspective. It's clear that Elon Musk has a great deal of influence with Donald Trump. They're buddies. But Trump says that they will, quote, provide advice and guidance from outside of government, which kind of suggests that this DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, might not necessarily be a literal government department. Now, one important point to make before we close on Elon Musk is that his businesses rely really heavily on government and the way that they fund and regulate. SpaceX, for example, a lot of his rocket launches happen right next to national parks, which means he has to get a whole bunch of environmental approvals to do anything. And SpaceX, Tesla, and some of his other companies are actually currently under investigation by various federal agencies, which means that he may be in a position of overseeing agencies that are trying to police his actions. We would usually call this an obvious conflict of interest, but obviously that's not something that Donald Trump cares a great deal about.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And as you said, it'll be really interesting to see how much influence these two men will wield from a position that's outside of the government, but supposedly a key advisory role. I also want to talk about Susie Wiles. Now, she's been appointed as the first woman to take the White House Chief of Staff role. Tell us about her and tell us about this position that she's going to be taking.
Susie Wiles actually convinced Donald Trump that he still had a political career after he lost in 2020 and after he led the attempted insurrection to overthrow the naming of Joe Biden as the next president of the United States. After all of that happened, she was the person who reportedly convinced him, no, you have a future again. And she has been with him for a lot. She's been with him while he's been charged with all of his criminal cases. She's steered him through primary victories, the 2 assassination attempts, and the change of his opponent to Kamala Harris after the Republican National Convention. And the biggest descriptor that I would use for her is that she is a survivor. She has been the only campaign manager to survive an entire campaign working for Donald Trump and not being fired or leaving. And if she manages to do that in the White House as well, then she'll do a lot better than the 4 chiefs of staff that Donald Trump had, one after the other, while he was in the White House the first time. She has also been described with, I think what's fair to say is a sexist trope as an ice queen, someone who doesn't show a great deal of emotion on her face and is very sort of powerful and scary. But let's avoid the sexist tropes, I feel.
Yeah, I agree. And we had this conversation as well about how, why can't a woman be emotionless? Why is that such a talking point? I did want to ask, and this might seem like a silly question, but what does a chief of staff actually do? The term is thrown around so loosely in so many different roles and environments. I'm keen to understand what the White House chief of staff job actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, the White House chief of staff carries out the president's intentions. She will be the tip of the spear of the Trump administration. That means everything from communication, political strategy, the way that staff do their jobs, the way that policy is formulated. She will be a person with a great deal of power, a great deal of influence, and she will also carry a role that doesn't have any particular formal recognition in the US constitutional framework. It's not as if she would have to be confirmed by the Senate or anything like that. This is actually a role that a president doesn't have to have, but effectively this person is a fixer, fixes any problems that the president has and carries out their intentions. So that's certainly what we're likely to see during the next White House.
All right, let's move on. Fox News contributor Pete Hegseth. Now, he has been named as Defense Secretary. This one has gotten quite a bit of attention. Tell us about him and why people are so quick to have an opinion on his appointment.
Well, he will be Defense Secretary and he's famously a Fox News contributor. I remember him because when he was on TV in 2019, he just randomly revealed that he hasn't washed his hands in a decade.
As I told you, my 2019 resolution is to say things on air that I say off air. I don't think I've washed my hands for 10 years. Really, I don't really wash my hands ever.
Help me.
No, I inoculate myself. It's just not, germs are not a real thing. I can't see them. Therefore, they're not real.
So you're becoming immune to all of the
exactly.
bacteria.
I can't get sick.
I don't know why he decided that he would say this, but he thinks that that's an important part of his character, so he put it on television. He does have a very interesting background, though. He served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Guantanamo Bay, the offshore detention facility. He has no senior military or national security experience, but has a great deal of experience on the ground, so to speak. He is a big defender of soldiers who've been accused of war crimes. He helped get some of them pardoned under Trump's first presidency. He's famously very against women being in the military.
I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated.
And he wrote this book with a memorable quote about how elites look down on people like Bruce Willis's character John McClane in Die Hard. And he says, we need honourable, powerful and deadly men like him, and presumably he's saying like himself.
Okay. Marco Rubio is Trump's pick for Secretary of State. This is the person who carries out foreign policy for the president. So I guess the question is, what does picking Rubio for that role mean for the world, Bension, over the next 4 years?
Well, I think the top thing it will mean is that there will be a great deal of conflict with China. Now, I'm not saying that that will necessarily mean military conflict with China, but Marco Rubio is one of several people that Trump has picked over the past week who are described as China hawks, which in the sort of defense language that people use is as opposed to doves, which are peaceful, hawks not so peaceful. This is a person who does not like China and wants to be aggressive towards that country. He was the co-chair of a commission in the Congress on China, and he sponsored a bill trying to stop the importation of goods made using forced Uyghur labour in China as well.
And look, before we wrap up, we can't forget Matt Gaetz, who Trump has picked as Attorney General. What do we know about him and what he might bring to the White House?
Well, if I was being a bit trivial before about the hand washing, I might be a bit trivial again now. People might remember Matt Gaetz as the very intensely Botoxed man at the Republican National Convention this year.
Why is it that the women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions? Nobody wants to impregnate you if you look like a thumb. They're like 5'2", 350 pounds, and they're like, give me my abortions or I'll get up and march and protest. And I'm thinking, march? You look like you got ankles weaker than the legal reasoning behind Roe versus Wade.
Gaetz is going to be enormously important because Attorney General is the person who leads the Justice Department. And of course, the prosecution of Donald Trump by the Justice Department will be shut down. But this man is an intense Trump loyalist. The question that I have in my mind is, what is this man going to be willing to do that, for example, Trump's Attorney General in the last administration wasn't willing to do? Because Trump has, of course, talked about prosecuting his political enemies. He's talked about investigating his political enemies. And if he has an Attorney General who's willing to try and do that, then that will be the scarier version of the Trump presidency, that people talk about him being a dictator or an authoritarian. Matt Gaetz will be the deciding factor, I think, in whether or not we see that big version of a dictatorial Trump presidency.
Okay, well, they're the biggest names we thought we had to cover off on, but who else should we be keeping our eye on over the next few years?
Well, there has been so many people that Trump has appointed this week who we could spend a whole episode on each, I think. One of them is, of course, RFK Jr. He's been appointed to a significant health role. He says that the US should take fluoride out of the water. He is a conspiracy theorist. He's anti-vaccines. It will be very interesting to see the degree to which some of his wilder opinions end up being health policy in the US. There's the new border czar, the former ICE director, Tom Homan. He will be trying to direct the mass deportation of millions of illegal immigrants. We've got the new UN ambassador, Elise Stefanik, or the UN ambassador to be, Elise Stefanik. She's a huge Israel supporter, so we can expect Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel to be emboldened by that. And I also should mention Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, who infamously wrote about killing her dog. And so, quite aside from anything she might do politically, that's a wild individual to be nominating for that very powerful role in the US.
Yeah, Bension, we've been talking a lot about Trump this week and US politics in the wash-up from the US election. And while it can feel like it's dominating headlines, there's a reason for it. People are really interested to see what this next Trump presidency is going to look like. And a huge part of that is who is around him and who is filling those roles. And you've taken us through some of the biggest names. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll be talking again soon about how they are influencing the US and its politics. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. A big thank you to Bension Siebert for joining us today. Before you go, if you liked this episode, we'd love it if you could share it with someone you think might enjoy it. It's a big way to support everything we do here at The Briefing. Another great way to support us is to check us out on socials, like, subscribe, follow, all that stuff. We're on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. We're also on TikTok and YouTube, search Listener Newsroom. And I'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning with Chris Spiri for the headlines. I'm Sacha Barbour. We'll see you then.